My name is Joe Woodham. Welcome to All Things Design, the podcast that unpacks how design drives digital transformation. Today, we're speaking with Jo Hagenauer, Senior Product Design Manager at REA. Thanks for joining us today, Jo.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, first question, what made you become a designer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've always been really creative, but I think I haven't actually taken a traditional path into design. After school, I was a bit like, oh, what am I going to do? I actually studied law, which I really, really enjoyed. And then that was my undergrad. And then in my postgrad, I did law and journalism. But then at the end of my studies, I actually realized that I didn't want to do either of those things, like it often turns out. And I had sort of started working as a freelance writer and content creator at a startup in Australia. But then when I went back to Munich, my hometown, I actually started at an agency as a conceptual designer. And they really just hired me on the basis of, I had a food blog at the time. I was like, here's my food blog. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, you kind of have, an eye for aesthetics, an eye for storytelling. We'll just get you in and just find your job, as it usually is with, agencies. And yeah, I kind of just looked after content strategy and things like this. But then we did have a couple of our conceptual designers who were basically doing the job of a UX designer already. So they were working on software for imaging for Siemens for X-ray practitioners. And so I was really interested in what they were doing. And then UX became a thing. So this would have been maybe 10 years ago or something, where UX wasn't really a course at uni that you could do. Like user experience design kind of was this emerging thing, and boot camps kind of covered the educational part of becoming a UX designer. And so I lent into that and did a couple of boot camps, and then really kind of was drawn to, the process of, blending psychology and research with then actually coming up with a solution and creating design. So really drawn to it, and yeah, moved back to Australia to start a product designer job. My first one at a small company in Brisbane called Rex Labs. And then about 3.5 years ago, I landed the job at realestate.com, which I'm still in, first as a product designer, and then moved into management about 2.5 years ago. So yeah, the passion for creativity was always there, but it was definitely a bit of a not a straight path into it, let's say.
No, it sounds like you took a relatively challenging path into it, studying law into design, very closely
Yeah.
related. Do you think it's studying law and then moving into designs helped you become a better designer?
Yeah, I mean, it's helped me become the designer that I am, I suppose. I don't know if it's a better designer, but it's definitely, as you say, it's not the most obvious connection. But then when you think about it, like what law really teaches you is having a very analytical brain and taking the facts of a case and applying the law to the facts to come out with a verdict, essentially. And so when you kind of see the parallel to design, like in design or in UX and product design specifically, you have to sort of problem solve, and you're taking an approach of discovery to find all the facts and the problem that you're actually trying to solve, and then apply the design process to come up with a solution. So it is actually a similar kind of process thinking.
Yeah.
So I think there's parallels, and yeah, I think that the things I was drawn to in law are the things that I'm drawn to in design as well. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, realestate.com, it's
Yes.
been one of the very well-known startups in Melbourne history, and they've got a great culture. They're very tech-driven. Talk me
Yes.
through, I guess, how they operate from a design perspective, and I guess the topic around cross-functional collaboration.
It's a very broad question.
It is.
Yeah, so I think what I've observed in the last couple of years being there, and especially now being in management at realestate.com, is definitely a shift away from sort of having a centralized design function to more embedding design into the team. So we often talk about this trifecta of product design and tech. And so we work in squads that then lather up to tribes. But within those squads, you usually have a designer who's working with a product manager and then a tech lead or a lead dev. And they're pairing very closely along the journey of, discovery and delivery to deliver outcomes, essentially. So it's very much about how do we embed our designers to work really well with those other two functions and help them collaborate effectively, rather than sort of seeing design as a service almost that kind of just executes on the ideas of product, which, I've seen happen in other fields or in other companies as well. Yeah.
I'm like interested to start there because like I think having the right communication from the start with product and design rather than design sort of as an afterthought is a very
Mm.
important, I guess, element of getting design right or getting a product flow right. How is REA focused on in making sure that design is at the right stage of the process?
Yeah, so I think every team works slightly differently, but what I encourage my team members always to do is form really, really strong relationships, especially with product at the start of any kind of project. Because there is a tendency, and this is definitely not across the board. I've seen a lot of product managers who are great at discovery, but I've also seen a lot of product managers who are very focused on like business outcomes and solution driven without really like digging into the problem we're trying to solve and validating that problem too. Because often we think there's a problem, but then we either don't get that problem right or there is actually no problem and we should, shift our focus somewhere else. And that is where discovery really comes in to future proof what we're doing. And I do think that discovery is a shared sport between product and design, because design can kind of be that partner to really challenge product to really think deeply, but also find the right research methods. We obviously also have researchers that lean in sometimes, but we do empower our designers to do a lot of research and discovery themselves. And so pairing them really early and making sure that our designers are empowered to have those conversations because they have those relationships really early in the process kind of makes sure that we're not just executing on a roadmap necessarily. It comes sometimes, every squad is different and every part of the business is different and the process will be different in each of those. And there is a risk also to blow up discovery and kind of slow down the process. And that's something that we just need to balance and be, proactive about thinking different types of validation. So discovery doesn't look the same from one project to another. It doesn't have to be a 4-week research project that,
Yep.
puts everything on hold. It could actually be experimentation or concept validation, but we do need to validate along the way. And I think that's where design can really lean in to lend their expertise.
It's
Yeah.
very fascinating. The term solution focus comes up
Yeah.
so frequently in my conversations. How do you work with product to ensure that you're able to give them the confidence that they do need to do the discovery phase or give it justice at the start of that process? But then also, how do you ensure that you're not having a too long discovery
Yeah.
phase there? Like, how do you get that right?
Yeah. Good question. I think again, it comes back to like the psychological safety that that this partnership has as well, like being able to challenge each other really early in the process. Um, I always encourage my team members to really think about the angle of the counterpart, whether it's a product manager or even a tech person when it comes to delivery, but like get to know them, get to understand what drives them, like what are the outcomes they're trying to achieve, not just for this project, but also more broadly in their role, like what keeps them up at night, like what are their motivations, because only when you understand that you can challenge effectively, because you're not just like, nah, we'll do it my way. It's actually like, oh, I see where you're coming from, but have you considered it, from this way, and kind of being effective at communicating what, your motivations are and your concerns are and things like that. But it does come down to just having really strong relationships between those 2 or 3 functions. And that comes with psychological safety. So like, how do you build relationships that are not just, we're talking about the work all the time, but we might swap out a one-on-one for a coffee chat and we kind of get to know each other better so that I do feel comfortable challenging you and not just, following your steer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the time, designers are very customer focused, but what you've
Mm.
just talked about is understanding communication styles of product or tech or the stakeholders. Like,
Mm.
has that been something that you've tried to really hone your skills around and then teach your team? Because I feel like in a lot of teams, that's not necessarily the focus. So, how have you upskilled yourself or your team to really understand that communication style and get the best out of those relationships?
Yeah. So I think you're right. At the early start of a career, designer is often very attached to their opinions and base them maybe on research. but often just on like, this is better design, wanting to sort of stand their ground a little bit. And the further you progress in your career, the more you learn, like, yes, our customers / consumers, because in real estate.com, we really have both sides. We have our customers who are, real estate agents, and we have our consumers who is our 12 million audience on, spending time on our app. So there's almost like that, and then the business as well. So there's 3 parts in it. But you really, when you progress your career and you spend a lot of time speaking to product managers or salespeople or marketing, you understand that there is that part, but there's a monetization part of it too. And that's where I think UX design differs from product design, because UX design is really user experience design, very focused on the user experience itself. Whereas product design is actually, no, we need to build a product that goes beyond just having a really great user experience, because we also need to think about how we make a business out of it. Like, how do we monetize this? How do we make money?
Yep.
And so that's what I encourage my team to think about more and more, and have those, close relationships and those frequent chats. Understand, like, what are the other drivers? Because you need to balance this with this, because you can have a really fancy product, but if you don't have a marketing strategy that gets it out there, like, you can't sell it. And then, us selling the product is what pays your job. And that's kind of, I think, a full circle moment when you realize, oh no, it's not just about making it look and function well. Like, it's all connected, and I need to balance those needs to arrive at an effective outcome. Yeah.
I think earlier on in designers' careers, like, I think thinking about the return on investment or the money that can be made from a product is almost a taboo thing. Like, people are like, I don't want to get involved in that. But it is becoming such an integral part of a designer role, right? Like, you have
100%.
to understand how everything that you do impacts back to the business, because the business pays salaries, or the product and how successful a product is really going to drive the money that's going to be there for making great designs or really improving user interactions with the products. So it's like, how do you, like, when you've got a junior designer, sort of teach them those, I guess, looking at things with the product lens?
Yeah. A lot of modeling. I think just, having them be exposed to the right conversations. Like, there's sometimes a tendency to be like, oh yeah, well, our junior designers kind of execute our designs. Like, I disagree with this. It's they need to have the right context and be exposed to the right conversations to connect the dots. And so I really try to pull in my team into those conversations when they happen, so that they have the full entire context. So if I see a tech and product being in a meeting and talking about really important things, I really advocate for my designers being in there too. Or when someone like a product manager speaks to maybe salespeople to get a bit more context, then I really try to push my designers to kind of get a seat at the table. Because if they have the same level of knowledge, they can connect the dots in a similar way, and they're not sort of bottlenecked, by me potentially getting that knowledge, but they're actually there listening to the same conversations. So yeah, trying to have them part of, the right conversations, encouraging to, also feel comfortable asking for a seat at the table at those conversations. Say, hey, you should probably be in that conversation. It might be really valuable for you. Like, that's just asked to get you in there. And then modeling, I think, this sort of close relationship that I was referring to at my level as well. So the trifecta that I was talking about, product design and tech, that exists at a squad level, but we also at a tribe leadership level have the similar structure, where we have head of products working closely with design managers and tech leads, and delivery managers in the mix as well. And so making sure that relationship is also set up in the way that I would want their relationship to be set up at their squad level. So like them seeing me challenge my head of product on some thinking and being part of those conversations maybe gives them the courage and the sort of the confidence to ask for a seat at the table and be part of those convos at their level too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to be able to challenge, right? There's always going to be difference of opinions, but that's how you get a good product, is being able to use multiple people's ways of thinking in a diverse sort of environment. How, like, you've spoken about obviously being able to challenge your product manager or product owner in terms of decisions being made. Like, you built that relationship over time. At the start of that journey, was there a lot of hesitation, or was the person that you're working with relatively mature, and then you've kind of been able to take that across multiple products and multiple squads?
Yeah, I've been very lucky having a head of products that I got along with very well throughout my career. It's a relationship that you need to work on for sure from the very start. And I keep coming back to this concept of the 4 stages of psychological safety. I don't know if you heard of that, but Dr. Timothy Clark has written a book about it, and we use it in our internal leadership training a lot. So it's a sort of idea that there's multiple layers of psychological safety. The first one's inclusion safety. So like feeling included and feeling safe to be included as part of a team. Then there's learner safety, where you feel safe enough to learn and sort of stretch yourself a little bit. Contributor safety, which is another stage. That's sort of like the idea of I can contribute. But then the highest level is the challenger safety. And that's the level of like this, I can actually challenge you. Like I have the psychological safety within this team or within this relationship to tell you to maybe look at a different angle. And I think that's the hardest one to reach. But it comes, I think, with curiosity again, like really getting to know their motivations, asking a lot of questions, understanding them also what drives them as a person outside of work as well. And then vulnerability and like admitting that maybe you don't have all the facts and all the knowledge, and being really open about that and trying to kind of work it out together. And that kind of builds that team bond of like, oh, we're actually kind of bouncing off ideas off of each other, and we're coming to a solution together, rather than like, oh, I'm presenting you a solution from my angle and you're presenting a solution from your angle. It's like, no, we're in this together, and it's a team sport, so we'll figure this out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great approach. Does that also help you, I guess, mentor and train, let's say, junior or mid-level designers in terms of, you're currently at this stage, we need to work on the next stage to build you up with your career? And like, how do you assess what level they're at to sort of help them move through that process to ideally get to challenger stage at some point?
Yeah. I've definitely had conversations with my team about this, as in like, here's when I learned about this in leadership training, I open up to my team. I was like, here's, what I've learned. Like, where do you think you're sitting? And then where do you think you're sitting in our little design team bubble, which, I obviously have, I manage a couple of designers. So there's a design team there. And that psychological safety is usually a lot higher than within their teams, which is that the squads. So just talking about it and being aware of where you're sitting already helps you to identify like what's holding me back. Like, why am I feeling like I can't? But then also being aware of that makes you maybe think about like, what are ways that I could challenge myself to maybe to contribute more, or like to do like to speak up, or what's holding me back and what do I need? And that's maybe my job as well. Like if someone's saying, hey, I don't feel very safe in this environment and I need a little bit of backup, then, it's your job as a leader to kind of make sure that everyone gets a voice and encourage that. And, when they do speak up, openly say, hey, that's a really good point. Even if you're not agreeing with that point, but like making sure that they are encouraged to speak up and they're rewarded for that, rather than sort of like, oh shit, now I spoke up and no one's really responding to me and it's awkward silence. And so that's probably the approach, like being aware of where I'm sitting, and then how, like asking them to almost be like, okay, well, what can I do as your leader to support you get to that sort of highest level?
Yeah. Interesting. So I've done lots of exercises in the past, which are assessing how you turn up in a work environment as opposed to how you might turn up in a home environment. Because usually in a home environment, you're surrounded by people that you trust and you care and you feel safe. And sometimes in a work environment, you might not yet have that degree of safety or comfort level. So it's like, how do you, which I found quite fascinating, because then you can work out, oh, these are the areas that maybe I'm lacking or not showing up correctly in my work environment. So it's quite interesting. Going back to sort of cross collaboration, we've talked a lot about products, but how do you deal with the tech side of things? So if we're going through that research discovery phase, we're pushing back and giving our product a bit of a heckle on decisions. How do we move that through to like the tech side of things and make sure that all of the stuff you are learning on that journey is being fed through to tech and the communications being done correctly?
That's another challenge that I've seen throughout my career, is not getting tech into the process early enough, but also balancing that with not distracting them from, delivering the work that they still need to deliver. Like, as much as we don't want to work in a sort of waterfall way and we want to be agile, there is still a bit of a situation where, things move through discovery and then into delivery. And whilst design and product is supporting delivery, they might already be doing discovery on the next thing. And so there is this sort of like dual track almost. And so how do you balance getting them into the discovery early on, so you are not going off track with your thinking, because there might be constraints that tech has to feed into and tell you about early on, so you're not going down a rabbit hole of like a solution that isn't actually technically feasible. So yes, it's always a challenge, but I think that's where you have, your different levels. If your company is set up like that, your different levels of tech counterparts. So you have your tech lead who can maybe do that sort of earlier thinking and discovery and free up the lead devs and your developers to execute on the delivery, and you kind of make a choice of who you're getting across. But it's super important to get tech stakeholders across early, because it does actually make sure that you're not tunnel vision on a solution that might seem super practical and super UX, like user experience is great, monetization is great, but then they're like, you know what, our architecture is not set up for this. Like this would take us 2 years to deliver. And that's what then throws out delivery timelines and deadlines towards the other end. And that often then kind of has you as a team pivot. So super important. And the other element, I think that collaboration is super important between design and tech is in that delivery stage, and making like your designers aware of, okay, well, how do devs actually work when they pick up a file and when they're like delivering? How do you support them? How do you set up your file structure to make sure they're finding everything that they need to find and not get back to you with 10 million questions and disrupt sort of your discovery process that you might have moved on to? What parts of the designs you need to go into more detail and kind of spec out a little bit more? How do they pick this up? Where could we slice things differently, make them smaller to speed up this delivery, or make them, how do we chunk things? So I think that is often a part that more junior designers are not involved, or not as evolved in their thinking, but it becomes more and more important as you progress in your career, that you really also understand how do devs work and how do I help them do their job better, because it drives efficiency as well. And it makes you, again, just a better partner to them.
Definitely. And I think the way like a product team works, like you have to be able to communicate on both levels. And it's very, very important that you understand what each other person is able to do or not able to do. So let's say bringing a designer into those conversations early, like would you bring a junior designer into the discussion with a tech lead to sort of get them to understand how that process works, and then sort of get them communicating with developers really early to ensure that they sort of start to learn how things work and how to sort of communicate there?
Do you mean for delivery or for discovery specifically?
Probably more delivery.
Yeah. So I think that the process, the way that this sort of goes with a lot of our teams is, they have done their design thinking, they have to, finished their designs, they're sort of delivery ready, and they're sort of handing them over. And that's when the slicing kind of happens. And that's usually when they're the ones in the room. So I would, at that point, probably not be as involved anymore, because the team has kind of agreed this is what the solution is. The earlier parts where it's like, okay, cool, like how can we actually bring this to life with the sort of the tech lead? So this is probably sort of the more before we get to the delivery stage. I would want them to be in the room just as much, because again, if they're bottlenecked with me giving them that information, it's a lot harder for them to kind of connect the dots. So a lot of those conversations do happen in the squad, and then our tech lead leans into our squad as much as they lean into the leadership as well. So they almost have that dual role of kind of helping the squads effectively deliver and move from discovery to delivery, but then also have those conversations at leadership level. But yes, I think information is key, and as much as the designers can be part of that, those conversations early, the more they understand, oh, this is how it works, and then they know that for the next project. And then they know how to maybe think about their designs in the context of that. So can they actually design something and think about, okay, well, these are the tech constraints we had last time. We might have the same tech constraints this time. Let me think about 2 other ways that we could design this solution so we don't run into those issues. So it just builds, that context builds over time, and the context only builds when they have that information.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Now, obviously, REA, they're relatively mature in how they use design in that process. If you're, let's say, a business that hadn't been on that journey or doesn't have as big a design function, what would you say is some of the benefits in this cross-functional collaboration approach is? Like, why do you think it's a good way of working, and how do you see it benefiting the overall output of building the product and the users?
Yeah. I mean, I think efficiency, right? Like if you're communicating really well between this sort of trifecta of product design and tech, you will shortcut a lot of like umming and ahhing sort of further down the process, like not going down rabbit holes or having tunnel vision at certain points, but actually getting all the facts on the table early allows you guys to be aligned and then move quicker through the process. So yeah, I mean, working at the company before I joined REA, it was definitely, we were a startup and it wasn't as mature as you say in terms of the processes, but I already could tell that this sort of dynamics between product design and tech was super valuable, and started investing in sort of those relationships. But as much as you can kind of see them as like peers that work together, I think that sets that team up for success, because as soon as you kind of say, oh, design is just that function that executes, it disempowers design and it doesn't give them that confidence to challenge. And so you will just potentially get a tech-led solution or a product-led solution. And it's not balanced with that consumer experience that is so important. So yeah, how do you set up processes and team structures and empower those three parties to really feel like they are peers and they are there to challenge each other and they are there to complement each other and to help each other kind of that funnel things down the track.
So many good things I could take away from that sentence just there. Like in terms of, there is so many studies out there saying that if design's implemented at the right part of the process, the overall outcome is like 70% more efficient, and it's like just a better outcome. If I was like a smaller company, like a lot of the time it is very solution focused.
Yeah.
Everyone has historically been solution focused. How do you get them to slow down, and like how in a small organization would you get them to slow down and go, hey, if we spend a bit more time on this planning part here and actually do this discovery phase, and maybe that takes a couple of weeks, that's going to get you a better result. The efficiency is going to be there. The team's going to work like more collaboratively, and the outcome is going to be a far better result. Like how would you sort of, I guess, communicate that this is the approach that we should take, and this is why?
Really interesting, because I was exactly in that same situation when I was in the company before I joined REA, where I realized that we had run a project and had built a product that didn't meet the requirements of our customers because we actually didn't get the problem right. We solved for a problem that wasn't there. There was a different problem to be solved. And that's when that's what my interest in discovery really ramped up, because I was like, hang on, like surely there's a better way to do this. And so I specialized more, as in by taking courses with Nielsen Norman in discovery. And I was like, hang on, there's actually this entire thing that, because often we equate discovery with research, but that's not the same thing. Like discovery really is trying to figure out what the problem actually is that we need a solution for. So the entire sort of first diamond. And that's the one that's being skipped when processes are less mature. So for me, that looked like, okay, well, I've identified kind of the problem of, okay, we're not doing the first diamond at all here. And this is what ended up happening, which is we sunk all this cost into building a solution that no one wants to buy because they're not having the problem that we thought they had. And in fact, we had this other problem that we should have solved instead. And had we just taken a step back and probably just done 2 weeks of, conversations with our customers, we would have known that from the start. And so it was really good having that sort of case study, because it got the really senior stakeholders interested, because they're like, oh shit, we actually did spend a fair bit of money here and energy on, and we're not seeing it converting that solution. No one's buying that product. So that really helped elevate the profile of the problem. And from there, what I've done is kind of like outline, okay, well, this is what, ideally the process looks like. And of course, it doesn't look the same way every single time you run discovery, but we should spend a little bit more time in sort of the first diamond, and ran workshops and kind of did sort of the advocating piece for it. It worked really well. Like, I think it really shifted the way that some of our teams were doing what they're doing, and really think about, okay, we need to just kind of just validate that that's actually the problem. Like, what data do we have to support that this is a problem? And what other angles could there be to explain that data? Because you need to challenge that too. Like, you can't just say X equals Z. You need to actually be like, okay, well, there's, there could be so many other interpretations of that data. And then that's where you spend a little bit of time being like, okay, well, what is the actual problem here? Like, why are we seeing this data, instead of just, being maybe somewhat also arrogant, thinking, oh, we know our audience so well, like we don't have to do this.
Yeah.
You like, research and discovery is so humbling. Like, there's so often you have opinions, they're very strong. I have very strong opinions sometimes on why I think our customers or consumers are doing certain things. And then you actually do run experiment, or you do run research, and like, oh shit, I was so off track. It's entirely a different issue. And so you just, you need to kind of accept that you don't know it all.
And sometimes you fall in love with the idea of it being this. So it's really hard to be like, it's not actually that. You're going in the wrong direction. Like, it's a really good example that you just gave of a project that didn't go right, and a lot of sunken money into a product that wasn't user-centric, right? I guess it's a pretty good example to take into any conversation now, that you can go, this is why we need to invest here. Do you ever, like, this is almost rewinding the conversation and going back to the start, but is there a process that you follow now? Because you said you did a bit of education there after that project with Nielsen Norman Group to sort of understand what that looks like. Do you have just like a standard process that you try and follow to make sure you're getting all the right data, the right insights, and speaking to the right people to ensure that you are actually solving the right problem?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think there is no such thing as one discovery process. Like, I know that the double diamond gets a little bit of heat these days because it's, it's been around for a very long time, and there's definitely a lot of people who are like, oh, it's not flexible enough and so on. But I think it is still a really valuable communication piece of like, there's a piece of, I have to figure out what the problem is before I figure out what the solution looks like. And so I think there's always this sort of parts to the process still to the day. And I use the double diamond to align conversations when I feel like we're going off track and we're jumping into the second part. I think effectively solving problems these days, or doing discovery, is just really right-sizing it, because I do see a big challenge, especially when our industry is really trying to drive efficiency, in design not taking the role too much of like advocating for discovery to the point where it slows down the process too much. I think it's finding the right ways, and it might look like a research project for this project because there's more unknowns and we don't actually know anything. We need to do full on discovery of like, let's talk to, our consumers and through research sessions and really understand the problem, versus actually we know what the problem is because we have data that backs that up, and we have existing research. And this is where we're really lucky at realestate.com, because we have so much existing research that we can lean on. We can kind of jump ahead a little bit where we dive maybe deeper into some of these questions, but also at the same time in sessions show concepts, and we can already test some concepts, at least early, sort of like solution thinking. So this is where the double diamond sometimes gets a bit muddied, but that's another way to kind of, drive efficiencies in the process, because you're a step ahead and you don't need to do another sort of usability testing session later down the track, or maybe that looks different and it could be unmoderated, which means it's leaner and quicker and cheaper. Yep. Or the problem is an entire different one, and you're like, even if I ask people about this thing that I'm trying to do, they wouldn't give me a straight answer, because they, there's this do and say and do gap, where often when you research in ambiguous spaces, and AI is definitely one of those emerging, that they think they have, or privacy concerns. They think they are very, oriented in terms of their privacy concerns, or they're very opinionated when it comes to AI. But then what they would actually do is very different. So like if you think about Facebook, all of us would say that we have big concerns about privacy, and they're growing concerns. But when you think about like a lot of data is being handed over because you're signing in with Facebook because it's just easy and convenient, that is sort of the say and do gap. So people say, yep, I'm really, really concerned. I would never do this. But then when you experiment with something, they actually would. And I'm not saying that this is, I'm not encouraging any businesses. And we're definitely not doing that at REA, where we test the boundaries there. But I'm just saying often there's things that you ask consumers about and they don't give you the answer that actually reflects the reality. And so in those types of circumstances, experimenting is a much better tool to actually validate what you want to do. Because even if 10 people told you, yep, I would love that solution, you design and everyone's like, oh, I don't know, that doesn't work for me.
We really need it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that didn't really answer your question. I think it's varied. You just really need to right size. You need to work with product. Again, if you have the luxury of having research dedicated in your business, like they're obviously great, great people to partner with and kind of figure out what the right method is. But right sizing and making sure you're not spending too much time and overthinking things is also a good idea.
Yeah. No, it's still like an answer is one size doesn't fit all, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just, this is the process, let's follow it. This will get us the right answer. Because if you follow that, then you're going to end up with a solution that might not work because it doesn't align with users, or they've said something and you followed a path and it just hasn't worked out.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. That was really good. I learned so much from that conversation. So thank you very much for, I guess, parting your insights. If anyone wants to reach out and connect with you and ask any further questions or anything like that, the best way just via LinkedIn?
Yep, that's perfect. So find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat. I love connecting to, especially like the Melbourne community, but also just the Australia UX design community. So if you just want to have a coffee chat or a Zoom chat, just ping me on LinkedIn. Find me there. And yeah, thanks for having me. I learned a lot too.
Absolute pleasure. I love these conversations and I love sort of unwrapping, I guess, how you approach things or your thought process, and also understanding a bit more about REA and how they operate as a business. I think there's so many good lessons. It's such a, I guess, a mature organization. So understanding their process, it's very educational for, I guess, other companies that aren't quite there yet, or designers that want to sort of understand how to improve parts of their process. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.